Hi class, welcome to this first video out of what should be around 15 of them as we go through the American Yawp textbook for Volume 1 textbook for American history. This is a textbook that carries us from prehistory, Native American origins, all the way to the Reconstruction period following the American Civil War. And so the purpose of these is to give you a little bit of a audio-visual review. I'm not going to spend a ton of time pulling up props and maps and all of that. If you want to use your textbook as a supplement to the images that I'm to this lecture, that's fine, but I view this more of as a podcast kind of a form to get some information out there to you. All right, so let's get started. Now first, we need to start talking about the first Americans, Section 1. Long before the European ships crossed the Atlantic, the Americas were home to millions of indigenous peoples. Native Americans, American Indians, all of those terms fill the bill. They had rich, diverse cultures shaped by their environment in many ways. Their life depended on where they lived, what resources were available to them. Now, Native Americans most likely had migrated from Siberia and to the Americas via a land bridge called Beringia during the Ice Age that connects modern-day Alaska to Russia. These early Americans spread out across the continent, and they developed societies based upon resources available in their regions. For example, the Mississippian culture built large mounds in complex urban societies. This would be in the areas of modern-day Illinois and even as far south as Louisiana. The Puebloans of the Southwest developed advanced irrigation systems, and they grew crops in the desert, which was absolutely incredible when you think about this. These cultures were incredibly diverse, and there were hundreds of languages that were spoken, wide varieties of social structures, small hunter-gathering bands, all the way to the large cities like Cahokia, home to tens of thousands of people, one of the largest cities in North America. These indigenous nations had their own forms of government, trade networks, religious practices, long before the Europeans arrived. In fact, some of these cities were probably larger than their European counterparts at the time. So, let's talk about Europeans right before this explosion happens that begins with Columbus. Now, over in Europe, things are changing very fast. The 15th and 16th century saw the rise of new technologies. They saw powerful monarchies and the drive for wealth that had pushed European nations to look beyond their borders. Now, the invention of the printing press, the perfection of navigation techniques or tools like the compass and the astrolabe, many of which had come from the Crusades, construction of faster ships like the caravel, makes it possible for European explorers to start looking beyond their own continent and to look beyond the seas. Now, the Crusades had carried European knights into the Middle East as early as 900, 800, when we started to see this fight between Christianity and Islam. And what those knights had discovered were spices and silks and luxuries from Asia, and these were things that European nobles wanted and they were willing to pay a lot of money for. So finding a faster route to the Orient, to Asia, to the Far East was quickly becoming a priority. But there's a problem. The overland routes to Asia were controlled by powerful Muslim empires, so Europeans needed to find a sea route. If you went overland like the Italians had, if your caravans were attacked or were raided by highwaymen or bandits, well, that means you're going to lose a lot of people, a lot of workers. You've lost what you spent money for. You have to charge more next time, and so it's driving up the cost. So if you're Spain or Portugal or other countries, you want to find a new way to get these goods at a cheaper price and cut the Italians out of the conversation. So that's leading us to this drive to find another way to reach Asia. Now, Christopher Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492. This marks the new era of contact between the old world and the new world. Now, Columbus wasn't the first one to arrive. The first to arrive is going to be Leif Erikson. He was Scandinavian. Some may refer to him as a Viking or the Norse. Around 1000. They stayed for a while but didn't stay long. Left very little record of them arriving. Columbus, however, marks the beginning of a continuous contact between Europe and Africa and the New World. The Spanish, again, Columbus sailed for Spain. Portugal arrives in certain areas soon after. And then we have the French and the English and the Dutch. which are going to claim land but do very little with it for a while. Now, the consequences of this contact, that's devastating for Native American populations, because when Europeans arrive, they are bringing with them not only weapons and skills of warfare that the Native Americans don't necessarily have. Their wars look very different than what is fought in Europe. But also, if you're a European arriving, you could be a carrier of diseases like measles, smallpox, influenza, and those were very deadly to the native populations because they had no disease, they had no immunity, no natural immunity to it. And I think back to a few years ago when COVID was just raging across the country. We shut things down because we had no natural immunity to this disease. Well, that's what's happening with the Native Americans. After a few years, you start to develop those immunities. But when you first see it hit, it's going to be very, very bad. And the population is going to be hit just very, very hard. And we may see as much as 90% of the indigenous population wiped out by disease within about a century. This drastic demographic collapse is going to reshape the Americas. It opens the door to European colonization. It makes it easier for the Europeans to basically move in and set up their society as they wish to set it up. And of course, that begins with the Spanish, and we have others that are going to come along after that. Now, the Columbian Exchange is one of the most obvious of the consequences of this, of the landing of Europeans in North America. And the disease portion I just talked about is a part of that. The Columbian Exchange is known as the exchange of goods, ideas, and people between the Old World and the New World. And this is one of the most important developments in world history. And if you look around today, go to the grocery store, you see some of the examples of that. Imagine, before 1492, there were no potatoes in Ireland. There are no horses in the Americas. There are no tomatoes in Italy. The Columbian Exchange changes all of this. Crops like maize, potatoes, and tomatoes, various melons, these are all native to the Americas, and they are brought to Europe, while Europeans are going to introduce wheat, sugar, and livestock like cows, pigs, horses to the Americas. In fact, Ireland, which is known for relying upon the potato, that's going to be the most important thing in their cultural history for the most part. It allows the population to grow. And later on, we'll talk about the potato famine. When the potatoes start to die and their population starts to collapse, it's going to lead to a mass migration into the United States in the middle part of the 1800s. Now, back to the Columbian Exchange. Now, unfortunately, all of this, this exchange included some brutal transatlantic slave trade elements as well. Europeans began transporting millions of Africans to the Americas to work in plantation and mines, creating a horrific system of slavery that lasted for centuries. And this legacy is going to force migration and exploitation that still impacts societies today in many ways. The Portuguese were the first to get involved in this. As they start moving around the coast of Africa, trying to find a water route over into Asia, they're going to encounter tribes of natives that want the goods that they are willing to trade with them. And gold and salt and various other things are going to be items of trade for European products. But over time, you're going to have wars between this tribe and that. And those wars are going to result in capture of your enemy. And we start to see a system, well, hey, we want to buy these things out of Europe. Will you trade me these items you have for my captives in war? And the Portuguese are going to basically buy these individuals and take them to the sugar islands, islands in the Caribbean, islands off the coast of Africa, and they are going to be used as labor for the production of sugar and sugar cane, which is becoming incredibly high demand in Europe. And then the Spanish will do some of the same things, and then of course eventually it's going to spread to English America. And so that's kind of where we get this whole Middle Passage, the beginning of the slave trade issue. So the Spanish, again, were the first to establish large colonies in America. They quickly are going to conquer powerful empires like the Aztecs and the Incas because they have better military technology. Diseases also is going to be a part of this. And the Spanish are going to rely upon the enemies of the Aztecs, enemies of the Incas, to assist them in the defeat of their enemies, which are in many cases are holding them in a form of colonial tyranny. Now, Spain's empire is going to stretch across Central America and South America. Portugal is going to be dominating what today we know as Brazil, named after a red wood, Priscilla wood, that's going to be in high demand coming out of the plantations of Brazil. Sugar as well. These colonies are incredibly profitable, providing gold, silver, and cash crops like sugar, and it's going to make these European monarchies very, very rich. Now, the conquest didn't just bring wealth to Europe. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers will impose religion, culture, economic systems on the indigenous populations. This is going to lead to creation of new blended societies of Europeans. Africans and Native Americans also are going to experience harsh conditions under a forced labor system that the Spanish will call encomienda. Think of it this way. These areas are controlled by Spanish nobles and these conquistadors, and the people that live in that area will be forced to work and pay taxes and that sort of a thing. So to wrap up this Unit 1, this Chapter 1, what's the takeaway from this? The first chapter of American Yawp shows us that the Americans were far from empty when the Europeans arrived. There were large towns and very distinct cultures. The indigenous civilizations were rich. They were diverse. The process of European exploration is going to have a profound impact on these societies, often a devastating impact. However, more foods and more livestock coming out of Europe into the Americas is going to have a big impact as well. Can you imagine the plains, the plains people like the Comanche and the Apache without the horse? Wouldn't happen without the introduction of the horse as a part of the Columbian exchange. Now, the legacies of colonization, the Columbian exchange, the interaction between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, that's going to continue to shape the world today. Now, from the foods we eat, the languages that get spoken, and even the borders of the nations. These historical events are going to leave an indelible mark on modern life. So this wraps up our review of Chapter 1 of the American Yawp. Now, I hope this breakdown helps you in understanding the major themes and the events that have shaped American history, especially this portion of American history. If you have found this to be helpful, you can hit the like button if you want. Subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have any topics that you would like me to dive deeper into. So thanks for watching, and we will continue with Chapter 2. Take care.